So back in 2019, Analogue, who's a company that makes like reproductions of classic hardware like the Analogue Super NT, the NT Mini Noir, I think that's what it's called. They announced the Analogue Pocket, which is an FPGA-based handheld that basically is a recreation of old handhelds like the 𝘽𝙀𝙎𝙏 Pocket Color and the Game Boy, and even like the Atari Lynx. Does anybody even remember that? Now, if you're wondering what the term FPGA means, here is my explanation of it that I'm gonna try to give. So basically, FPGA stands for Field Programmable Gate Array, and I hope that these line up in post-production, otherwise that's gonna look stupid. Basically, the FPGA chips that are inside the Pocket allows it to emulate the original Game Boy and other handhelds from like a hardware level, from a hardware perspective. This isn't software emulation here. So think of this kind of as like a modern remake of the Game Boy, where it actually is going to play all of these games and act like it's on original hardware. So none of like what you see on the Pocket is software emulation until we get to something later. Pretty much no matter what Game Boy or Game Boy Advance game you put in this thing, it's gonna work on it. So I have a fan translation cartridge of Mother 3, and I put that in the Pocket, and like it just works. Now obviously there's a lot more like technical mumbo jumbo that goes into it, but basically this lets you play a lot of original cartridges. And I think that's kind of neat. Out of the box, the Analogue Pocket is capable of playing games from 3 systems: the Game Boy Color, and the Game Boy Advance. Now you can get adapters for those other systems, but for me personally, like I'm probably not even gonna bother with doing that. The Game Boy stuff on here is like totally perfect for me, along with the other stuff that it does. Nor do I exactly feel like becoming a TurboGrafx 16 collector in 2023. So I got mine around Thanksgiving of last year, and I wanted to give myself like a little bit over a full month to kind of like fully collect my thoughts before I did a review on it, because I know if I just opened the package up and then did a video 10 minutes after that, my reaction was probably gonna look something like this. But you want to know what else makes me scream like a 19-year-old who just got accepted into Harvard? Clothes. So I just want to send a huge thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Into the AM. Hey, do you like clothes? Because you probably should, because we can't all be walking around naked. Into the AM is actually like a really awesome clothing brand. I'm personally, like legitimately a really big fan of their products. Everything that I've gotten from them has been comfortable, it fits right, it doesn't make me smell like an old taco. Obviously, I'm pretty big into art. I love like cool screen printed designs. I've actually like, as a designer, I've actually designed a lot of t-shirts over the years, and I've worked with screen printers. So like, I can tell you, man, this stuff like that they print, it's pretty solid. Think this bear is gonna go away anytime soon? No, because it's good ink. Into the AM makes everything from your basic tees to your little joggies, and they also pump out some pretty cool hoodies. And I'm wearing one right now. I haven't washed this once yet. So if you're looking to get some premium apparel for your smoking hot bodies, click the link in the description of the video to head on over to their website, where you can also use the code indiejacob to save 10% off of your order. And if you're watching this around the time this video goes out, you can actually catch their site-wide sale going on from April 27th to May 1st of this year, where they're gonna have lots of goodies up to 20% off. Dude, I don't know about you, but I'm gonna go in there, I'm getting me some joggies. Thanks again to Into the AM for sponsoring today's video, and now, let's get back to talking about that bougie Game Boy. So the overall design of the Analogue Pocket is super simple and like really minimal. It kind of feels like Google or Apple took a look at the Game Boy and said, yeah, let's make that not ugly. It's got this very clean look to it, and I'm not gonna lie, sometimes even I feel bad touching mine, making them get all dirty. So I picked up this skin from a seller on Etsy, and they have like multiple designs. I've seen some based on the original DMG Game Boy, the Game Boy Pocket, but the second I saw this Zelda one, oh, I went, how in the hell? That ain't number one. It's got 4 face buttons, it's got the D-pad, the start and select, the home button, like all your typical things that you'd expect. Obviously it's got some volume buttons on the side too, along with this tinted green power switch. I really like this a lot. I thought that was a really nice touch. It kind of made me think of whenever Google used to do that with their Pixel phones. And you got the big speakers on both sides of this. I thought that was interesting. So they went with dual like stereo speakers, and dude, they get so loud. So that covers the main unit, but I'm not gonna lie, I feel like I'd be stiffing y'all if I didn't talk about this little doohickey right here. I remember whenever I was like 9 or 10 and I was playing like Game Boy Color games and Game Boy Advance games on the Game Boy player for the GameCube. That was a lot of game, and it was just like my favorite thing in the entire world. But they kind of look like crap on the Game Boy player. So I always wanted a more updated, modern way to play Game Boy games on the big screen. And this does exactly that. This is just so freaking cool, man. Like, I love how you can just walk right up to it while it's docked, pull it out, and then you just resume the gameplay right there in handheld mode. And the cool thing is about this, it also supports up to 4 players. I'm not sure when I would need to play 4 players on this, but that's cool. The only thing I don't like about it is I'm not a huge fan of how the USB-C port's just kind of sitting there. Like, I feel like I might scratch the bottom of my pocket eventually. I mean, I haven't yet, but I kind of feel like it's pretty easy to do it on. Now, the dock is totally like an optional thing, so yeah, I get that this might not appeal to everyone, but I don't know, man. I think it's super essential to the overall experience, but that's just me. If you don't get it, you're not totally losing out on it because you still got that screen, which is so good. This screen is 1600 by 1440, which I believe is 10 times the original resolution of the Game Boy itself. The thing here that Analogue's doing is they have these different video modes that you can apply. So every system has at least like 2 or 3 different video modes that you can pick from. The original Game Boy has like 5. So because the screen is so pixel dense and so like high res, they can emulate each of these different Game Boys that came out through the years, and they can do it like perfectly. With the original Game Boy, you can pick from the DMG mode, which is like the piss screen thing that we all know and love. You can pick the Game Boy Pocket, the Game Boy Light, or like a Virtual Boy style one that looks, I think it's called, what, Pinball Neon Matrix? God, I love that name. Now, obviously, most people are probably just gonna pick the Analog GB mode. I mean, it does objectively look the best, but if you're a soft boy like me, and you wanna remember the 90s, in all of their glory, you might be picking one of the other modes. My favorite is the Game Boy Pocket one. Like, this is how I remember a lot of these games looking. Like, I played on an original Game Boy some back in the day, but never a whole lot, just because the screen was just complete ass, and I always had better options to pick from. So this is how I remember most of my Game Boy games looking, this or like the Game Boy Color mode. But it doesn't just stop there. Like, you can go into these and customize them further, because you can add like color palettes that are kind of reminiscent of when you would take an original Game Boy game and you stick it in a Game Boy Color, and it would kind of try to generate the color that it thought would be the most accurate to that game. There is so much that you can do on the Analogue Pocket to customize how you want to play. You can adjust the width of your games on the height, and you can stretch it as much as my pants do whenever I go eat at a Golden Corral. You can also adjust the brightness of the screen, which is such a massive quality of life feature that you can't get on like any Game Boy. The level of customization here is just crazy. Like, I think they thought of everything. You can run games as if they're in like GBA mode. You can also add frame blending. You can adjust the sharpness, you can desaturate the screen, and like I said earlier, each system has its own specific display modes for. The only real issue that comes up with this screen, though, is that since they prioritize the original Game Boy's aspect ratio, that means that you're going to get some letterboxing whenever you play like GBA games. And that sort of brings me to my next point. The second you start playing Game Boy Advance games on here, it's kind of when some things fall apart. All the buttons feel extremely good for the most part. The D-pad is I'm a little iffy on. Sometimes it feels great, sometimes it's like you get some awkward accidental diagonals, but overall it's pretty fine. Like, I haven't noticed that much of an issue with most games I'm playing. I cannot say the same for the L and R buttons. It's like they tried to design them after Game Boy Advance SP shoulder buttons, but they don't have much give to them. Whenever you're pressing on them, you almost have to press directly from the top. There's not really a lot of give from kind of like the corner or the side. You pretty much have to like squeeze them directly from the top like I'm doing in this video. So it's kind of dodgy and not necessarily the most comfortable thing, especially because if you're holding it like that, you have a tendency to possibly touch the cartridge. And that's kind of a problem. So if you know me, I'm a massive F-Zero fan. Love racing games to death. Love the F-Zero games on the Game Boy Advance. Those suck balls on here. You cannot drift comfortably, like, at all. And because you kind of have to really clamp your hands whenever you're playing it, dude, no. If I'm playing an F-Zero game on the Analogue Pocket, I'm pretty much always playing it docked to a TV because, like, I can't drift worth shit. Now, thankfully, Analogue has included an option in here that lets you take the L and R buttons and you can map it to the X and Y buttons. So this really hasn't been that big of an issue for me. I'm currently replaying A Link to the Past right now, and I have the buttons mirrored to the X and Y buttons, and honestly, it's like totally not a problem at all. But I wanted to mention it because it is a problem for F-Zero games. So with the Pocket, Analogue announced Analogue OS, which is their take on an all-in-one user experience for handheld gaming. But from my understanding, it's gonna keep evolving and growing like as time goes on, but something that I loved right from the get-go is they've made something that is just so clean and very simple, super easy to use. Like, personally, I've never been a fan of what I like to call overly designed UIs. Like, sure, things like the Wii U and the 3DS have tons of personality like baked into them with their interfaces, but I'm here to play games, not stare at me while my console takes 1,000 years to load. The Pocket just trims the fat, loads quickly in between games and menus, and it's just like so minimal and easy on the eyeballs whenever I'm playing games at 2 in the morning when my wife wants to go to bed. Look how nice and simple that is, dude. Just there's actually like a ton of features in this console. So first you have like the library here. I probably won't be using this a ton because there's not like a lot of actual functionality that it provides. It's more just kind of like visual eye candy. I mean, it is nice to see how many hours I've put into Super Mario Advance. So that's cool. But more than anything though, these two things are why I wanted the Analogue Pocket in the first place. And sometimes they don't even work. So one of the huge things that Analogue was touting whenever they first showed off the Pocket was the fact that it was going to support save states and it was going to support sleep to wake. So we've gotten so accustomed to having both of those features like on something like the Nintendo Switch, for example. It's really nice to make save states when you play a game, and it's nice sometimes just to play a game and just put that thing into sleep mode and go into the other room to make dinner or whatever, walk your dog, and then you can come back, put your console back on, and resume right where you left off. I've wanted this for Game Boy games for so long, and I can't tell you how nice it is to have this feature when it works. This is like a total crapshoot with this device, so I would say 75% of the games that I use, no problems at all. I still have yet to figure out what causes this issue. Some people say it might be down to the SD card. I've tried 3 different micro SD cards to see if I can fix this. None of that worked. It's really weird. It just seems to happen with certain games. Like, yeah, here I am just playing Quicks and it works like totally fine, but for some reason I'm playing Link to the Past and nothing. Also, I love on the memory screen at the top, it gives a description of all those moments will be lost in time, like tears and rain. What the f? So yeah, super freaking nice features whenever they work. I just wish they worked like 100% of the time. But I mean, hey, I guess we're talking about 20 to 30-year-old cartridges here, so maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. But what would a video about an analog product be without addressing the big fat elephant in the room? Hacking. So whenever this thing was announced, that was like the #1 thing that everyone wanted to know was, well, there's 2 FPGA chips in here, so what's that other one for? One of the FPGA chips in this thing is, I'm pretty sure it's just strictly dedicated to just emulating the hardware, but the other one is for something called Open FPGA. That's where things get a little dicey. So this is pretty incredible, but we have this amazing community of developers and people who are really interested in porting cores and stuff over to this device. So you can play things like NES games, Super Nintendo games, arcade games, all of these other things that I'm not remembering right now. This is the easiest device that I've ever tinkered around with, and I didn't even have to do like 90% of the work. The community basically did it for me, and for that, I just want to say thank you. Now, the original intent of this from Analogue is basically for like preserving video game history. So they actually have one on here called Space War. Now, this is like the original, I think it was supposed to be the first video game ever created. Now, is Space War good? No, but it is still cool to have it on a device like this just to experience it from a historical perspective. What I'm the most interested in though is the arcade cores, because some of these are really hard to come by nowadays. You know, I love some of that 𝘽𝙀𝙎𝙏. I can play the original version of Radar Scope on here. That is freaking sick. But then it's also got your common ones like Asteroids and Donkey Kong and Galaga and all that stuff. But it doesn't just stop there. No, you can get like hacks for these too. One of my favorite hacks of any arcade game of all time is the Galaga Fast Shoot hack, which is exactly what it sounds like. It makes you shoot fast as shit. I was already sold on the Pocket purely from the premise of just playing Game Boy games and other handheld games like on the go in a modern form, but if someone slaps the Mrs. Pac-Man speed hack on here, I'm gonna lose my fucking mind. This to me is such a massive bonus feature because I essentially now have like every console and every arcade game and every handheld up to like 1995 on the Analogue Pocket. And that's not all, man. Like, there's even more types of games that you can play on here. Whoa! One of the features that I don't think is talked about nearly enough with the Pocket is its support for an app called GB Studio. GB Studio is essentially like an application that people can use to make their own like homebrew Game Boy games. And Analogue has partnered with them to provide support directly for the Analogue Pocket. So what you do is you make your game in GB Studio, and then you can essentially like create a Pocket file for it. You can port it for the Pocket, and then you can slap it up on websites like 𝘽𝙀𝙎𝙏.io or something, and then people can buy it from you or download it for free. whatever. I have played so much Wordle on this thing. I've been getting really into kind of like playing these like smaller games lately just because they're really bite-sized, they're fun. It's kind of interesting to see what creative things that, you know, people can come up with essentially in their bedrooms. A couple that I want to highlight here is Bulb. This is like a really fun kind of like puzzle platformer. GB Wordle, I mean, it's Wordle for the Game Boy. And then there's also this cool kind of like horror game called, I think it's Dead DS. Is that how you say it? I haven't really put a whole lot of time into this one, but this is kind of like the Game Boy home run game that a lot of people talk about. And from what I've played so far, it's pretty freaking good. I'm so excited to experience all the creativity and all these other cool little games that really couldn't have gotten made if it wasn't for an app like this. I'm just loving how the Pocket is essentially going to provide me like a never-ending library of games to play, and that is just so awesome, and I'm having a hard time still comprehending that. Oh my god, dude, this recording is so long, I gotta wrap this up. So what do you guys think about the Analogue Pocket? I cannot lie, even with its flaws, this thing has completely transformed how I do like handheld gaming lately. I have been absolutely loving it. Aside from like the shipping debacle and all that stuff, everything else with this has been pretty amazing, pretty fun. Even the flaws are totally tolerable. So I'm really interested to hear what you guys have to say. Drop all your thoughts and opinions and stuff in the comments below. And in case you're wondering, yes, this is the definitive way to play Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle 1 through 4.